With no doubt, the great country of the United States has been privileged to have such valiant citizens willing to fight for social, economic, and political reform. Lewis Hine is one of these diligent crusaders. With just a camera and his heart aching for reform, Lewis Hine was able to change the way the entire nation saw child labor. Lewis Hine had the capacity to understand that life should not just evolve around the people at the economic and political peak, for the common American was just as important. It was through his restless efforts that child labor became viewed upon completely differently in the United States. When the Civil War came to a close in the year 1865, the trend of industrialism swept across the nation. This time period created thousands of jobs for people willing to work to support their families. As labor infused itself into American culture during the Industrial Revolution, businessmen began to target younger children as laborers, as they could be manipulated easily, paid at smaller wages, and were less likely to go on strike. By 1900, nearly 2 million children under the age of 15 were laborers, working in dangerous conditions for minimal pay. Workdays were 10 to 14 hours with little or no breaks. Factories were dangerous, and with complex machinery, many children lost fingers, arms, and legs. Fumes and toxins were also in abundance in factories, leading to chronic conditions or diseases. Child laborers in rural areas did not have life much easier either. They worked in boiling temperatures using dangerous tools. Children working hard labor received little or no education, and each day became a struggle in the workplace. To add to these appalling conditions, the employers of child laborers had no regard for the safety and well-being of children. The time period of industrialism created a need for money, and business owners would do anything for it, even if it was at the expense of the health of a child. Children were often physically and verbally abused by company owners, for they were treated like young adults. The photo here displays a young boy who was brutally beaten on the lip for not selling enough newspapers. Many of the children working in these factories saw disturbing images that no child should ever witness. If only the children knew that their helpless cries would eventually be answered by one man in particular. Born on September 26, 1874, Lewis Hine was the son of Douglas Hill Hine, who was a sign painter, and Sarah Hayes Hine. At the young age of 15, Hine dropped out of school and occupied a variety of jobs. Sometime later on, Frank A. Manny, the head of education and psychology department at the State Normal School in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, consulted Hine, encouraging him to start a teaching career. Hine would go on to study at the University of Chicago, Columbia University, and New York University, and eventually married a woman by the name of Sarah Ann Rich. Through Hine's studies, Manny saw potential in Hine and suggested he start taking photographs of immigrants on Ellis Island. By all means, photography had been used all around the United States by the time of the 1900s, but it was still considered a new resource in America. Although photography was no easy task, carrying around heavy cameras and tripods, Hine eventually went beyond Ellis Island. Lewis Hine began to take notice of child labor and its horrendous ways. As he started to photograph the tenements and sweatshops where children lived and worked respectively, he began to understand the true depths of child labor, and the uprising in America had begun. In 1904, the National Child Labor Committee was founded, setting out a mission of promoting the rights of children in the workplace. Starting in 1907, Hine, in his 30s, worked part-time for the National Child Labor Committee, and a year later, he left his teaching job to work for the group full-time. Hine, when he began his job, was committed to uncovering the real facts. He saw himself as a detective. On many occasions, Hine was disturbed with what he saw. In many factories around the country, children were hidden from the public eye. For the access to factories and many other places in which children worked, he had to disguise himself as someone else, such as a fire inspector. Of course, it was clear who the opposition was, the company owners, and for the most part, they had done a good job hiding the truth from the public eye. As a member of the National Child Labor Committee, Lewis Hine was constantly traveling around the country. Along with his wife Sarah, they traveled together through Mississippi and Virginia. Lewis Hine wrote in a letter, "From April 25th to May 16th, 1911, I made quiet visits to every cotton mill in the state of Mississippi, with but one or two exceptions." As he traveled around the country, Hine would write about his experiences. One time, he wrote about how two 15-year-old boys were carried by coal into a car below them. One had horrible burns. The other one was killed by the coal. A rather extreme place Hine visited was the Ewan Breaker. He was able to witness the risk and dangers that the boys faced every time they went to work. Hine photographed the congestion, the filthy air, and the boys sorting through coal. He could practically see the coal dust and wrote that the dust went so deep into the boys' lungs that they could cough up a great amount of dust. Hine stated that the Breaker Boys came to symbolize what the suffering children were undergoing in the workplace. Along with the tremendous stand Lewis Hine took came a significant amount of risk and danger. As stated earlier, Lewis Hine would disguise himself to sneak into factories and mills under false pretenses, putting his reputation on the line. Not only did he risk getting caught by company officials, once he entered the workplace, he put himself at great physical risk, just as the children did. If managers realized what his intentions were, he was then vulnerable to physical attack. No matter what the consequences were, however, Lewis Hine was tenacious to make the lives better for the many children who were suffering. Hine's photos were shown all over the country through publications sent out by the National Child Labor Committee. He personally designed books and pamphlets and created descriptive captions for each picture. As people began to become angered by the pictures, they began to stand up, just as Lewis Hine did against child labor. An accumulation of the photos of children smoking, little girls running spinning machines, and the Breaker Boys led to an immediate change. These profound images had become a weapon in the fight against child labor. By 1911, about 30 states had raised their minimum working age for children. In 1912, the federal government created the Federal Children's Bureau to protect the welfare of children across the U.S. The short-term impact of Lewis Hine was also evident through the passing of the Keating-Owens Act, which established a minimum age of 14 for child labor, 16 for mining, and a maximum 8-hour workday and 6 workdays per week. By the 1920s, the amount of child laborers in the United States had been halved from what it was in 1910. And in 1941, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed to ultimately abolish child labor in the United States. In the long run, Lewis Hine's impact on American history goes far beyond child labor. Hine and a select few others have been able to show what a simple photograph can do for the lives of many. Lewis Hine has always thought of photographs as powerful tools used to express the sheer emotion of people. His idea of telling a meaningful story through photography still resonates today, as photographers around the country are using photos to win support for social causes such as poverty, AIDS, and the environment. Lewis Hine has given modern-day photographers belief that if they show some character and determination, a response from the public will come. Through the stand taken by Lewis Hine, child labor was abolished in the United States with the help of powerful photos. It was the determination and strength that Hine possessed that allowed him to execute his plan of stopping child labor. Lewis Hine died in 1940, not being able to witness the complete end of child labor. However, it is undeniably Hine who is most responsible for bringing an end to it. Additionally, through his efforts, he opened up a pathway for photographers in the future to fight for reform. He was just an ordinary man with a camera who had a dream, and did whatever it took to make this dream a reality. Lewis Hine is the true embodiment of what it means to take a stand for social reform, and his legacy will live on.